We'll go ahead and bring this meeting to order, the Board of Adjustment September 5th, 2019 meeting. Madam Secretary, would you please take roll?
Clay Thomas,
Here.
Christina Hill,
Here.
Lee Lawrence, he's absent, Brad Stanley,
Here.
Kim Toulouse.
Here via telephone.
Okay, we have Kim by cell phone.
Yeah.
Everybody, would you please speak into your microphone so he can hear you when you speak?
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Secretary.
you. We have a
We have a quorum. We'll all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Large, would you please give us the ethics law announcement?
Board members are reminded that if, with respect to any matter or any person coming before the board today, you have received a gift or loan, you have a pecuniary interest, you have a commitment in a private capacity, such as a family, employment, business, or similar relationship, or you provide a representation or counseling before an agency to a person or entity for compensation within the last year on a matter being considered, you must disclose that gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation at the time the matter is being considered. And you must furthermore abstain from deliberation or voting on the matter if it is clear that the gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation would materially affect the independence of a judgment of a reasonable person. Board members are also reminded that under the Board of Adjustment rules, if you had contact outside this meeting with any person interested in a matter coming before the board today, you should disclose the nature of that contact at this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Large. Appeal procedure, Mr. Lloyd.
Most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Moving on to general public comment. Any person is invited to speak on any item on and off the agenda during this period. Action may not be taken on any matter raised during this public comment period until the matter is specifically listed on the agenda as an action item. Madam Secretary, do you have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
I have a comment card from Nancy Davis, but I'm not sure which item she wanted to speak on.
On the winery.
Okay, all right. We'll get you at that time then. Okay, no, we don't have any.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Possible action to approve the agenda. I'll accept a motion to approve today's agenda.
I so move.
Mr. Stanley, second. Ms. Hill, all in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Next is the possible action to approve the August 1st, 2019 draft minutes. Before I accept a motion, Madam Secretary, as I went through the minutes, I noticed that on page 7 of 9, about midway down, there's a sentence, and it says that Chair Thomas asked the applicant for a continuance. I don't believe the board or any board member actually asked for a continuance. I believe it was suggested that the applicant may wish to continue it. So I'd like that to reflect in that manner, please.
Okay, I'll make that change.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the draft minutes? Thank you. I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Stanley, second.
Approve.
Ms. Hill, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Next up on the agenda is administrative permit case number WAD MIN 19-0017 Tahoe Form. Before we get started, are there any disclosures from the board members?
Yes, I have to recuse myself from this item since I am the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. If you'll go ahead and wait outside until we get through this. We'll call you back, I promise. Any other disclosures?
No.
Excellent. All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Toulouse, are you still on the line?
I am.
Okay. Just worried.
Thank you. Ms. Olander, podium is yours.
Good afternoon, Julie Olander with Planning and Building. This is an administrative permit to review a community outdoor business license application for the Tahoe Forum.
Sorry, Julie, can you speak more into the microphone? It's a little hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to start again? Are you okay? Okay. Julie Olander with Planning and Building. This is a request to approve a outdoor community event business license for the Tahoe Forum at the Sierra Nevada College on October 5th. The forum is putting on a speaker series, and they're hosting Maya Musk on the 5th of October from 2 to 3:30. It's estimated that 650 people to 700 people will attend the event. It is free and open to the public. They're proposing to set up an partially open-air tent on the campus, and the tent will be provided by Camelot Party Rental, who will obtain the necessary permits to install the tent. Parking is available on the campus, Cornerstone Church, Incline Village GID parking lot, and along Country Club and Incline Way. Also, there will be attendants available to direct people to the parking locations. There will be no food served at the event, and restrooms will be available in Patterson Hall and Prim Library. Here's a layout of the campus. You can see where the tent is. Patterson Hall is to the north. Prim Library is sort of to the, I think that's the east. Might be, no, it's these. And then there's showing the parking lots that are on campus. And here's a layout of the tent showing where the seating is and where the stage is. Public notice was sent to properties within 500 feet of the site. Also, this item was heard at the Incline Village and Crystal Bay Cab on the 3rd of September. However, there wasn't a quorum at the cab, so there was no cab recommendation. However, the applicant was there and presented information on the event. Various agencies have reviewed the application, and their comments or conditions are included in the staff report. Staff is able to make the 4 findings and recommends approval, and I provide you a possible motion, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. I do have a quick question for you. It's the same question that Washoe County Engineer Division has, and that is whether we've already gotten the documentation that the Cornerstone Church and the IVGID Recreation Center will allow parking on their properties?
No, I have not. I would ask the applicant that question. I believe that they were supposed to get that. That's part of one of the conversations I had with them.
Thank you. Any more questions? Mr. Stanley?
Yes, I have one, and I noticed hands went up on whether or not the material had come in. The question I had, though, is, to your knowledge, were there any comments made by the CAB, even though they didn't have a quorum?
I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but the other planners that were there, I asked. It seemed like it was, there weren't a lot of questions about the Tahoe Forum at Benny.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, you have any questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Toulouse, do you have any questions? I'll get it right.
No, you asked the same question I was going to ask. That's my major concern with this application is the parking and its availability. And I think the applicant will probably provide the answer for us.
I believe they will. Thank you. If there's no more further questions, is the applicant present wishing to speak on this matter? Please come up to the podium.
Would you please fill out a comment card when you're done?
Yes.
And hand it in?
Just state your name, please, for the record. And
Good afternoon. My name's Diane Severance, and I'm Vice President of Advancement for Sierra Nevada College. And
My name's Ty Casey, and I'm the Tahoe Forum Project Manager.
so we have gotten confirmation from IVGID to use their property for parking. We did reach out to the Cornerstone Church. Sierra Nevada College has a an agreement with the Cornerstone Church that, and we share our parking lots because we're just adjacent property owners. And so that's a longstanding commitment that we have between one another. But when we reached out to them about being able to use their whole parking lot for Saturday, they have another event happening. So we're really going to be relying on the Ivgid Rec Center parking lot. And we have something we can enter into the record confirming that in writing.
Okay, yes, we can accept that. My question is then, you're losing 70 parking spaces, is that right? That's what we have listed for the church?
Yeah, we have about 350 spaces on campus. And Ivgid is providing, how many?
Over 100, about 100 to 200.
About 100 to 200 at their rec center parking lot. So we think that is more than sufficient to cover the, we're assuming that people come by car, at least 2 to a car, so we're expecting about 300 cars. So we think we have the parking to cover that.
Okay, because if not, you were at 500, now you're at 430.
Yeah.
And you're expecting 650 to 700, so I think it will be, you better have 2 per car to cover that.
Yeah, I don't think they're all individual drivers, yeah.
A majority as well are students who live on campus, at least 100 or so, who won't be taking cars to this event, and another 100 are community members too, who will be walking as well, so it won't all be car traffic.
Okay. And if you can do me a favor, if you'll do me a favor just for the recording, if one of you will speak, and then if another one wishes to speak, make sure you state your name again so we don't get confused on that. Not that we should between male and female, but it's for the record, so. Are there any questions? Mr. Stanley?
If perchance there's not 2 visitors per car, this may be obvious with the line of questioning and the responses and so forth, but do you have any sort of backup plan at all for that?
If we're expecting more than 400 cars?
If there in fact are more than 400 cars which arrive?
You know, we have done this event in the past. And 2 years ago, we provided parking, which was at the Cornerstone Church and Ivgid Rec Center. And that Tahoe Forum was with Steve Wozniak, and we had about 1,000 people come to that, and we did not have a parking issue that day. We're expecting a substantially lower turnout for this particular speaker. And so I do think from the experience that we've had in the past, I think that we're adequate. We're good.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Madam Secretary, is there anyone wishing to speak on this item?
We don't have any comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close the public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion. Is there any discussion?
Sounds like a good project.
Thank you. Mr. Toulouse, you have anything you wish to add at this time?
No, my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will go ahead and entertain a motion. Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that, after given reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WADMIN 18-0017 for the Tahoe Forum, having made all 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Development Code Section 110.808.25. And that includes consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effects on a military installation.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Julianne Lander with Planning Building for the record. It should be WADMIN 19, not 18. I just want to correct that error.
WADMIN 919, that's right.
All right, so can we just revise that to approve administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0017?
That will work. I will go ahead and second this. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We will take just a moment to bring Ms. Hill back in before we start the next one.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
when Ms. Hill is back on the dais, I will have to bow out of the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. She'll be here shortly.
All right. Just let me know when she is, and
I'm back.
Thank you. Ms. Hill is back. Mr. Toulouse, you are free. Thank you for your
All
your
right.
assistance.
thank you very much. Have
Thank
a
you,
good
Lee.
day.
You too.
Thank you.
All righty, bye.
I mean, Kim.
The next item on the agenda is administrative permit case number WAD MIN 19-0014, the De La Montaña Winery. And I believe Mr. Broadstick is up.
Good afternoon. Chris with Washoe County Planning. So we were looking at WADMIN 19-14. This is the De La Montaña Winery. So you all have heard this at the last meeting, so I'm going to try and make this pretty expedited. I will cover some aspects of the project just for a refresher. So this is an administrative permit for winery use in the low-density suburban regulatory zone. The applicant's requesting 4,200 square foot structure in which about 1,200 square feet will be for production and 2,400 square feet will be for a tasting and barrel room. It is located off of Bordeaux Drive and it's 2 acres in size. One thing that I wanted to make you guys aware of again is that no special events will be allowed with this use type. So within the LDS regulatory zone, a winery is allowed, but a winery with special events such as weddings is not permitted. The applicant is proposing 16 parking spaces. 410 requires a minimum of 5 parking spaces for a tasting room. This is served by municipal water and sewer, and the trip generation that has been provided to staff is expected to be around 30 average daily trips. One thing to note is the property did have established CC&Rs back in 1964. The applicant and adjacent property owners did work together to rescind those CC&Rs in May of this year. This is a vicinity map of the proposed location. As you can see, it's located quite close to Mount Rose. The access location is not shown in this vicinity map, but the primary access is located off of Bordeaux Drive. I've provided the site plan associated with this use type. And the applicant has provided an updated landscape plan to staff. So as you guys, as the board knows, there have been substantial public input related to opposition of this request. We've also received a number of public input in relation to support. However, from August 1st to September 4th, we've received 7 phone calls, 20 emails, all in opposition, and 3 emails in support. The concerns proposed to staff were related to traffic onto Bordeaux, traffic from Bordeaux to Mount Rose Highway, the impact that wineries and the growing of grapes would have on fauna, so bears in the area, and how that would impact them coming to this location. There was also considerable concern related to school children. So there is a school bus stop located off Bordeaux. Additionally, there was significant concern related to this venture being what's known as a stake in the ground. So the concerns are the applicant is putting a commercial venture in this location with the intent to allow for additional commercial developments to come to this location. So during the time from the continuance, I did reach out to Washoe County School District, the Transportation Division. And so they did confirm that bus 1620 does utilize this location. Pickup is at 9:03 a.m. Drop-off is at 3:54 p.m. And they confirmed that 25 students do utilize this stop if they all ride. So there is fluctuation. They did not account for any incoming school children. So as of today, 25 students do utilize this stop. On August 8th, the applicant did submit for a director's modification related to some of the conditions that were troublesome in the last meeting. Specifically, they were to modify the buffer requirements, tree requirements, and the fencing requirements. So as reviewed by staff looked at the items and the requests, and we determined that no landscaping buffer will be required. So the vineyards count as living ground cover, and they would satisfy this condition. So we removed the requirement for ornamental landscaping to be around the perimeter of the sites. Additionally, the applicant requested no trees be required every 20 linear feet. The concern came that shade impacts the growth of grapes. So the planning staff did not want to lose tree coverage within the site. So instead of having perimeter trees along the entire site, we requested that the trees be densified within the use and around the existing structure and parking areas. The last request was to add smooth wire fencing and transparent predatory resistant fencing. Staff looked at this, and we also looked at the public input that came in with the request for more open fencing and more transparent fencing. And we came to a determination that we do support the addition of smooth wire fencing, transparent, predator-resistant fencing. Additionally, I did highlight the conditions that have been added that were a little bit of confusion at the last meeting. So we did add the agricultural machinery and tools shall be screened from adjacent properties when not in use instead of requiring them to be covered. Additionally, the owner did provide above and beyond conditions associated with this use, including signage at the exit of the driveway indicating presence of school children, as well as working with Washoe County Engineering and Public Works to appropriately sign Bordeaux Drive. Additionally, the applicant worked with Montreux, the owners of Montreux, to come to an agreement on maintaining the access easement in relation to the paving and the dust elements. Additionally, the owner has provided additional conditions where they will limit appointments between 2:30 and 4:30 p.m. and on Monday through Thursday have the hours of operation be appointment only. With that being said, staff does believe that we can recommend this approval. It does meet all the required findings. However, I do have the traffic engineering supervisor for District 2 of the Nevada Department of Transportation that can speak to additional items related to the Bordeaux and Mount Rose Highway access.
Thank you. First of all, are there any more questions for Chris? Chris, I have just a couple, real quick. First, the phone calls that you received, were they followed up by emails, or these were just phone calls that you tracked?
So these were phone calls that were directed directly towards me. I took notes on who called and what time they called. But no, there were no follow-up emails.
Okay, so these are just 7 people that or 7 phone calls you received in addition to the actual emails that we've all received?
Correct.
Okay. And the 25 students, is that one stop and all 25 students get on? Or is, because of the age different, is there more than one bus that you know of to transport kids to either elementary and junior high and high school?
So I reached out to Mike Boster, and he reached out to the director of the Transportation Division within Washington County School District. What they stated to me was that bus 1620 is for Hunsberger Elementary School, and it's for one stop. There are no middle school and high school kids at the stop at this point.
And we don't know if they're planning on doing that if there's population growth in the area?
I've received no information on that.
So we are to assume that there's 25 students that go to the elementary school then at that
Yes.
location? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Just follow up to that, if you don't mind. Mr. Bronczyk, when you were speaking to Mr. Boster, he didn't mention the Arrow Creek complex, the educational complex going in there with X number of thousands of students?
No. So when I spoke to him, I expressed that there is a school bus stop, a known school bus stop at this location. I wanted to confirm the number of students that utilize that specific location and that specific stop. And I wanted the times of pickup and drop-off confirmed. And so that was the information that they provided to me.
Gotcha. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. Is the applicant present? And I should say, do you wish to speak on this matter?
Good afternoon. For the record, Dennis Troy with Realm Constructors. Give Donna a second to pull up the PowerPoint that we've prepared. Much like Chris, I've somewhat prepared an abbreviated version, but there are quite a few members of the public, so we'll go a little bit more in depth into this. So again, I wanted to thank staff for working with us over the past 19 months on this, and especially in the last month as well, to kind of work through some of the issues that came up during this last meeting. A little bit of history. Little bit of history on the project for you. The De La Montagna family comes from 6 generations of farmers and ranchers. They have over about 25 years of experience making wine. They specialize in these boutique wineries that are smaller in size. They actually grow the grapes off-site. Most of them are grown off-site in vineyards ranging in size from 5 to about 50 acres. In total, they have about 200 acres of wineries. There we go. As you can see on this next slide is a picture of the De La Montagna's winery down in Healdsburg on that slide. And here's a brief introduction to what kind of classifies boutique wineries. So boutique wineries are small in scale. They aren't mass production wineries. They're small in nature. They produce about 5,000 cases of wine in a year, as opposed to a Gallo that can easily produce over 5 million. This winery is, it's anticipated to be operational throughout the year, but also on limited hours. They're really only going to be open through the months of April through December, specifically by appointment only on Monday through Thursdays. And then Friday through Sunday, the hours of operation are approximately going to be from 11 to 6. Quick little history on this site. So as you know, this requires an administrative permit. This is the first of its type within here. This site, the process for locating this type of use on this site started over 3 years ago. And the applicant spent over 18 months searching for the perfect site that met the requirements of the Washoe County Code, such as zoning, sewer, public water and sewer hookups. They had a number of pre-apps with the county staff. They looked at 6 other sites. They actually went as far as entering into escrow on 5 of those sites. The site was ultimately selected because of the exposure to the sun, accessibility, and compatibility with surrounding uses. There is a picture of the site and some history on that administrative permit again. This site was ultimately selected, like I said, because it checked all the boxes. We considered different mitigation measures to address the surrounding uses, such as locating the building a substantial distance away from the surrounding residential uses. And this site, it provides ample on-site parking. We went a step further, wanted to limit the hours such that people aren't on site during quiet hours of the day, if you will. And we really took a keen look at blending into the surrounding uses. So the operation of this boutique winery, they have approximately 4 to 8 rotating wines for patrons to taste. Again, limited hours of operation. The key to the De La Montaña winery, and they found this out with their other ones, is typically that guests will stay anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. They don't serve prepared food. They do have packaged cheeses and crackers and meats if people want to try those with their wines, because they do pair well. But ultimately, turnover is key. So this isn't a wine bar. This isn't a lounge. So the traffic study for this type of use, so we actually worked with Mitch Fink, who's the Washoe County traffic engineer, to generate the traffic study for this project. It generates 30 trips per day. That's the equivalent of 3 single-family residences. Next page. As far as site improvements go, there will be about 1 acre of crop production on the site. We did request a director's modification to allow for grapes to go up to the property line where the ornamental landscaping would otherwise be required. If that landscaping were required, it would take up approximately 1/2 acre of crop production. So it would be reduced by, I think the ultimate number was about 47%. Other improvements include groundwater containment, permanent utility connections, the driveway parking, signage that we'll get into, as well as a fire turnaround for apparatuses, and then also landscaping and common areas. Again, here's a picture of the site. And the architectural design, as mentioned, it's approximately a 4,200 square foot building. You can go to the next page, Donna. It was a contemporary yet rustic design that we worked with, but it also includes outdoor seating and patio areas, and the public seating areas, should people choose to hang out for a little bit, I guess you could say, is actually on the opposite side of the single-family residences and screened from them. Here's a picture of the building. And then compatibility with surrounding uses. Like I said, this is really an agricultural use with a commercial component in it. The code was actually amended approximately 1.5 years ago to allow for these types of uses in this zoning district. And 2 of the 4 adjacent residences are actually next to the existing 8,500 square foot office building right off of Mount Rose Highway. We've reached out and we've worked in a very transparent manner with the neighbors. I think a couple of them are here. We've addressed their concerns and we'll continue to work with them such that we are good neighbors. As Chris had mentioned, there are a number of concerns from the public, and I wanted to talk about those really quickly. Those are related to increased traffic, the school bus drop-off, this being a drinking establishment or a bar, and also the decreased property value. As far as the increased traffic goes, like I said, we worked with Washoe County traffic engineer. They determined that this is going to create about 30 trips per day. To put that into context, right now there's about 140 vacant lots in Montreux that will create over 1,300 trips when they're built out. So this is not a bar, this is not a cocktail lounge, nor do the owners want it to be it. It's a tasting room. So right now it's a vacant parcel. They plan on investing a significant amount of money to bring this, to develop this site and make it something that the community can actually be proud of. Wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the bus stop. Chris had spoken with, staff planner Chris has spoken with Washoe County School District, as have we. The school bus route currently comes off of Bordeaux Drive and heads down Jeffrey Court where it turns around and then ultimately drops off the students at the intersection of Jeffrey Court and Bordeaux Drive. With that being said, on the next page, we've proposed conditions above and beyond what would regularly be required to limit operations Monday through Thursday to by appointment only, with limited appointments during the hours of 2:30 to 4:30 during the drop-off. Further, we've proposed signage, children at play and school bus drop-off signage, and then we're also going to work with the Washoe County Public Works and Engineering Division to sign Bordeaux Drive. These both have been included as conditions of approval. Commissioner Toulouse actually brought up some wildlife concerns during the last meeting. And so I wanted to address the mule deer and black bear habitat in the area. We spent quite a bit of time speaking with NDOW, the Nevada Division of Wildlife, as well as other local experts, as well as other local neighbors who grow who grow grapes on their property, as well as have beehives. And I went as far as to speak with the Alaska Department of Fish and Wildlife because they have really big bears up there that they have to contend with. What we found out, what works is that tall fencing worked for the mule deer. 7 feet to 7.5 feet work for the mule deer. Electric fences work for the bears. Now, one would think that a bear could easily swipe down an electric fence. That's very true. But studies have shown that the electric fence more or less is annoying to bears, and they would much rather go somewhere else and forage for foods that are easier to get to. It's simply a deterrent. It works on grizzly bears in Alaska. It works on bears around here as well. Also, motion detection sprinklers work very well. Should game come up to the fence, they kick on, they scare them away, as well as resident dogs such as a Great Pyrenees has been shown to have a deterrent factor with it. So we're planning on using a combinations of these types of fencing. We know that some will work, some will not work. It's gonna have to be, we're gonna have to work through those. And, but we do intend on using a smooth wire fence with a hot wire or an electric fence. Here's an example. This is a private homeowner on the north side of 431, just due west of the Saddlehorn subdivision, pretty close up to Timberline almost. This is about a 4-foot tall fence. Inside this fence, they have grapes, they have beehives, and they have no intrusion. So they see the bears, they see the deer, but they actually don't physically make it into their property. So that type of fence, while it's not 7 feet tall, it seems to work. So every site's different. So as far as the conditions of approval, we've reviewed the conditions of approval. We agree with them, and we really don't have any concerns. In closing, We're still really excited to bring the first winery and vineyard to the greater Truckee Meadows. We're absolutely willing to work with the neighbors and gain their support, and we look forward to adding to the Washoe County community character in the area. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Troy. Any questions? Mr. Stanley?
Hi, thanks for the update and the new presentation and the additional things you've done to try to address some of the community concerns. Going over these, though, there are a few that we may have gone over last time, didn't hear them this time, and I couldn't find them in my notes. So, no events, but appointments. Can you kind of work with me a little bit on those definitions?
So the thought of appointments is such that there will be times where there is nobody at the winery, Monday through Thursday. And people will need to call if they actually want to go into them. This is pretty common down in the Napa and Sonoma area, that if wine club members or people want to access a winery, then they need to make sure that somebody's there. People are often working out in the fields, but there isn't always somebody who's going to be there to take you through, talk to you about the wines, educate you. That's the thought behind the appointments.
Okay, if I may. So someone could have an event and make an appointment or 2 appointments or something for that event?
No.
Okay, how does that not work?
Talk me through this. I'm trying to
Okay.
understand.
I want to have an after-office meeting. And it would be an event under certain scenarios. Wouldn't be a wedding, probably. But, so I make a couple of appointments.
If it's after the hours of 4:30,
Within
you
the
would just be
appointment window, yeah.
willing to go. But any time during the hours of, they're included in the conditions of approval, any time between the hours of, I believe, 11 and 4:30, Monday through Thursday, you
Yeah.
would need to call and schedule and make sure that there is adequate staffing to be there to host. I don't want to call it an event, but the
Staff
people that
available.
want to go in and taste
So-
wines.
So again, under events, what is ruled out under the definition? We had an example of weddings, so weddings are ruled out. What else is ruled out under events?
I
That
would-
might be ruled in under appointments.
I would need to probably defer to Washoe County staff on that.
Okay.
I believe that there's a threshold of, is it 40 people maybe? I don't know, maybe staff could help me out
How
with
an
that. Of
event is
what is
defined.
that threshold
Okay.
that triggers an event? I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Chris wants to answer that question, I believe.
Well, Chris, hold on a second, because I still have some questions for Mr. Troy also.
Yes.
I'm going to stay on that topic of an appointment. Although we're using the term of appointment, which sounds singular, how many people can be at one appointment?
We haven't limited that, and that's something that we're open to have a discussion with. An appointment could be 2 people showing up in their car to taste wines. It could be a private limousine showing up with 8 people in it. We have not put a limit on the number of people per appointment, but we are willing to discuss that.
And I guess my other question is you're going to have 16 parking spaces, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So when we use the term appointment and one car shows up with 2 people, that's one appointment.
Correct.
But can you have up to 16 appointments in that hour because you have 16 parking spots?
Yes.
Okay, so if you had 16 people, you had 4 people per car, you're already at over the 60 mark right there. On
Correct.
site. Okay. I'm just trying to get an idea.
Sure.
The term appointment, like I said, sounds innocuous, but it depends on, like I said, if I show up with a small bus of friends, you know, that's got 12 people or 14 people in it, that's one appointment. And then someone else can show up, you know, either singularly or even more at the same time to have an appointment.
That is correct, and I actually spoke about this with the owners who apologize that they are not here because they're in the middle of crush season right now, so they do apologize for that. But the appointments are really tied to staffing. And so if you have one person working essentially the tasting bar, and you have one appointment show up with 15 people in it, they aren't going to be too inclined to schedule another appointment with another 15 people on top of it. So they were, that's something that we had discussed previously. It's a way to essentially control capacity as well.
Couple more questions. You said the mule deer require a 7-foot fence to keep them out. How high are you looking to put a fence around that property?
We were looking at probably a 6-foot tall smooth wire fence with the with woven in hot wire strands is what seems to work after discussion with NDOW. NDOW, they said that kind of the standard is 7 feet, 7.5 feet is what they look at. But they also said fences that are lower seem to work as well. It's really a trial and error, as Jessica Wolf at NDOW explained to me. She said some things work for some properties, some things don't work for others. Obviously, we're looking at using a 6-foot tall smooth wire fence right now. So.
And my last question, I guess, just for clarification purposes. When the land was purchased, was it, and I don't know if you can answer this, but was it purchased with the intent to put a winery on that location?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
No questions.
Mr. Stanley?
Pursuing this idea of number of people, whether we call them an event or an appointment or a series of appointments. I notice here in the definition of some of the reasons you would get an AP here, one of the concerns was occupancy, I think was the word used. So and this may have been gone over again in the earlier meeting, and I apologize if I missed it or can't recollect, but what is the maximum occupancy?
I'm not sure of that at this point. That's a question that the building department will ultimately answer when we submit for building permits that are tied to the structure. So there are different occupancy loads for a production area versus a common area or a gathering area. So we know right now that approximately 1,200 square feet are going to be limited to production, leaving about 3,000 square feet of actual area where people can congregate. So they will determine the occupancy load based off of 3,000 square feet of common area for where people can gather. From my background, that's how I understand that Washoe County creates the occupancy loads. So.
Any more questions? Mr. Troy? Okay. Chris, did you have something you wanted to add?
I do. Let me pull it back up. I apologize. So I'm using my phone, so it's going to be a little, I might be a little slow in reading this, but so a winery with special events involves the recurring special events being ancillary uses to the principal winery use. This means an assembly of less than 100 persons on any one day of the event. Such recurring special events may include, but are not limited to, weddings, tours, promotional events, entertainment, so indoor or outdoor, wine and food and pairings, and craft fairs. So wineries as a whole, per our development code, are allowed within the LDS and MDS zone. However, that winery with the special use application, the only two regulatory zones that is not permitted in of the allowed winery uses are LDS and MDS.
Mr. Stanley?
Chris, talking about promotional events, I would assume that that excludes Montreux events or events on adjoining property, but not on the De La Montaña property. Is that correct?
Say that one more time?
All right, Barracuda or something like that. You're going to have lots of folks, right?
Oh,
Okay,
I got
so-
you. No,
So what
something
kind
like
of
that would not be
discrimination? Does it
permitted.
have to be driven by the applicant, the promotional event?
So Trevor may want to jump in on this, because I don't know if my interpretation differs.
I'm just going to reiterate what Mr. Bronzik mentioned, and that is that special events are strictly prohibited with this winery in this regulatory zone. So they're not allowed. And it's my understanding that the guests will be by appointment, essentially by appointment only. And so there is no anticipation that there would be a bleed over from the Barracuda or as a special event on this site. That's my understanding.
Mr. Lloyd, are we getting into semantics, though, when we call it, instead of calling it a special event, we call it an appointment? I mean, I'm unclear on it. I mean, I understand the intent, but, it's kind of, well, gee, I didn't call it a special event, I called it an appointment. Therefore, I had 40, 50, 60 of my friends show up and take the place over for a period of time. I mean, would that be allowable under the term appointment?
What I can tell you is that if there are prearranged events, specific events, such as a party, a wedding, where there's invitations, that would be strictly prohibited. I do understand what you're saying. There is the potential, at least that it could happen, that a gathering of people that certainly looks like a party could show up. But I don't know if that's common. And again, my understanding that this is by appointment and it's for tasting of wines on site. I think there's also going to be some restrictions based on the availability of parking. But I'll let the applicant maybe describe a little better for us what the anticipation is.
Okay, thank you. Chris, can you come back up to the podium? I have another question for you. And maybe I just missed it. I had reviewed both the prior staff report and the current one, but I didn't see an actual traffic study. Was there one done for this location?
So there are preliminary workings with the applicant and Mitch Fink, our traffic engineer. So the way traffic studies would work is if the specific use type were to generate 80 average daily trips or greater, a formal traffic analysis would be required to be submitted with that application. So the way I spoke to Chris Klein this morning, just to get a little bit more understanding on this aspect, because it was a hot topic with the opposition. And even the support also mentioned certain things about this. The 3080T comes with that specific use, what that specific use and those specific lots generate. It does not account for any existing traffic whatsoever. When it hits that 8080T, the formal traffic analysis is required, and that formal traffic analysis would incorporate all existing traffic. So everything from Montreux or Mount Rose or anything that would increase or create traffic. This one did not come to that level. This was reviewed by our traffic engineer, and no comments or concerns were provided to us related to this, nor were any additional conditions related to traffic provided to us, nor were any concerns or recommendation of denial.
I'm going to ask you this question so you can go ahead and bring the expert up. But 80 trips, is that what the cutoff is? It's at 80 trips, did I understand that correctly?
80 trips for Washoe County. It
Can
does
I-
differ for NDOT.
And it's an important clarification, that's 80 peak hour trips. 80 peak hour trips would trigger a traffic analysis. This is 30 daily trips, so there's a big difference.
yes. But those 80 peak hour trips, who decides? Who makes that determination of whether it's going to be only 30 trips or 80 trips or whatever? Is that part of the application of what they're estimating? And then that would trigger the,
So our traffic engineer would use a traffic manual that indicates average daily trips, peak usage, et cetera. But I think I'm going to defer to OJ on this. He's with NDOT, so he's not part of our staff, but he likely works with the same information.
okay, before you go, Mr. Stanley?
I have one more question for you, if you don't mind, Chris. On the occupancy issue, we've been waltzing for 10, 15 minutes about events versus appointments, and the bottom line is how many people are going to be there, right? And so we probably will assume that not too many people are going to join in on wine production, although, because that might be considered an event perhaps. But how many wine tasters do we anticipate? What's the occupancy for the wine tasting area? What do we anticipate? What is too much? What kind of control does code have over that? And how does that apply at this stage in the process?
So unfortunately, that's out of my wheelhouse. So occupancy loads would come from the fire district, so fire marshal, as well as our building division. So the plans examiners, the building official, they review this information and they determine occupancy. It's not something in my wheelhouse, so I don't have an answer for you.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and have the traffic engineer.
Hi, good afternoon. For the record, Richard Ojevolk, and I'll spell that O-U-J-E-V-O-L-K. I'm the traffic engineering supervisor for the Nevada Department of Transportation here in District 2. To answer the question, the common international or national reference for trip generation is the ITE Trip Generation Manual. They're on the 10th edition. Basically, it's a book filled with hundreds of studies of different land uses that give guesstimates of trip expectations for various land uses. On this one, I just kind of got called just recently on this. This one, we base our estimate on 100 peak hour trips. So this would be, the 30 daily would be below our thresholds even to look at. Normally, we just, on smaller things, just for our record, we require trip generation studies, which is basically what they've done here, and to say that there's 30 gross trips per day. It doesn't relate to vehicle occupancy. However, it's 30 vehicles that you say. And, you know, like I said, a van or something like that with 8 people in it, it still constitutes one vehicle. Regardless, it's, this wouldn't have caused any, it doesn't trigger anything in our books. We're kind of happy that it's a joint use driveway. We do kind of promote those. It lessens the amount of driveways on our road, so it's a good thing. But no, this is something that administratively I would have looked at and said, not an issue with us. And then just went ahead and no comment, really. It doesn't trigger any threshold or evaluation. We know that there is an overall concern with Mount Rose Highway. We are working towards producing a corridor study in the near future to address basically from the 2-lane section all the way down to the roundabout, actually. And that's, we were deciding the project limits the other day. And that's just to look at the corridor overall in the next 20 years on what we need to do there. But that's forthcoming over the next year or so.
Okay. Is it okay to call you Richard instead of trying to
You
pronounce
can,
your last
Richard or OJ?
name? OJ, all right,
Yes, sir.
OJ, we'll go that way with it. OJ, I got a question for you. Then the traffic study, if you're using the manual or using a book, is that theoretically constructed upon wineries in the California area then? How do you draw your conclusion of a winery here in Washoe County, considering there hasn't been any wineries in Washoe County? So
No, it isn't. It's a generalized study of hundreds of thousands of different land use studies that were done across the nation since the 1950s. It's a generalization, but it is the best and only tool that everybody universally agrees on using. For this one, it's more probably geared towards specialty retail than an official winery, even though I believe there's categories. You try to go for something that is similar, but also has the best curve fit, because this is all statistics. So the one that gives you the more accurate representation or the greatest number of studies.
Okay. And just one other question is, when you do look at this or whatever, is it myopic in nature? You're only looking at that winery, you're not really taking into account future growth or future traffic flow on, say, Mount Rose, or the construction that's going on with additional homes, or what? Is all that taken into account, or is it really just kind of at that moment in time what you're looking at?
No, it's, in general, the overall process, we have the RTC that produces the LRTP, which is like a broad overview of growth throughout the 20-year history based on the master, land use plan that generates future stuff and generates the projects for the 20-year work plan. As you get down to this level, it does tend to be more microscopic just because you're evaluating individual impacts. But again, we do take into account the volume. I mean, the ADT is not severe as far as detrimental in that those 30 cars, per day would push it in one way or the other. It's almost considered, there is some stuff that we call, the term just eluded me, de minimis. And you have to just account for that, because even with our predictions, traffic during a weekday fluctuates 10 to 25%, just depending on whether it's a Wednesday or a Friday afternoon, and it depends on land use. So, we base our things off of what we call the annual average daily traffic, which if you take 365 days a year worth of count and divide it by that number, that's the average. So we work on those numbers. We may make some slight adjustments for peak season, like for skiing season or something like that, where the traffic may vary. But I mean, it's just a holistic look, and it's more just individually seeing if those driveways accommodate it. And that 30, like I said, the 30 daily is not that much of a detriment to that access. So like I said, it's designed to carry more for the subdivision.
Was the 140 vacant lots still within Montrose, was that taken into account as to increase traffic on that road and how it might affect that winery also, or not?
It is on the larger level, and as we get microscopically, we have to look at it harder. I mean, a lot of the developers come in phase, and they'll look at the 200, but as of the last 3 years, we've been asking them to look at the total build-out and, as far as access for their entrances and for their egresses.
Okay. Thank you, OJ. We'll see if someone else has a question. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stanley.
Thanks, OJ. So it's the incremental change that you're looking at. Is that the short version of this? It's not the 132, it's just this particular site and this particular venue and this particular use?
It's absorbable within the impact of the development,
Okay.
Correct, and the accuracy of the predictions.
All right. Does being near a school bus drop-off area impact traffic studies at all?
If people followed all the rules and regulations 100% all the time, no. But you do, I just was watching articles on it where there was 60,000 reported violations of bus stops throughout the United States, just like in a 2-week period or something like that, just a couple years ago. Or just the other night on the news. And I was kind of horrified at the numbers, but they were also showing videos of, people passing parked school buses on curbs and sidewalks and stuff like that. But no, I mean, what I'm saying is that in general, if everybody, and we have to make assumptions that everybody is a rational driver, is that everybody's supposed to observe the laws when, when school buses are unloading and loading, which is basically stop and letting the children load and unload. I know that, there's a lot of concern with that, but that's the best our assumptions can be. I mean, we put up a school crosswalk, and even the NRSs say that for us, as far as NDOT's concerned, to work with school boards, we have to be, the school board has to come to us, and then they give us requests, and then we work with them on each individual request. To date, we haven't heard any problems with this bus stop.
All right, thank you.
Hopefully that clarified it. It's kind of a complex issue. Whether you follow the rules or trying to accommodate people not following the rules.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't have a question, but I have a comment on ITE, and I have a trip generation packet in my office, on my desk at all times, I use for, that's what the chart that says there's 10 daily trips for single-family dwellings. So that you look at site-specific, you don't look at future, you don't look at down the road. And that kind of thing is measured more by the traffic flow and when it gets to different levels of speed, when it starts to back up and it becomes level F, then you have a problem. But in all my years of planning, you just look at site-specific traffic generation, and that's what it goes on, and 30 trips is minimal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, AJ, we appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
More questions from the board? Okay, we'll go ahead and close that. I'm sorry.
Got one more. And
Mr.
I'm not
Stern?
sure if this is for Chris or the applicant. Maybe for the planner?
Dennis? Yeah.
Again, I may have
can't
missed
think of
it.
that now. It
Sorry?
might never happen.
Sorry, go ahead.
Again, I may have missed this somewhere, but is residing in this complex proscribed? Is it anticipated? Is it disallowed? Is it allowed? Can people, occupancy is going to be one, I guess, that we're just going to leave in the cloud or something, let it float away?
So the proposed application that we received does not indicate any sort of residences.
And direct follow-up to that, of course, is there any prescription on is there any disallowance in the way the code is set for someone, 2, 3, 4 people residing in that, in the winery area, in this, on this site and in these buildings?
So I don't claim to be a full-blown expert on our code at this point. It is quite a large code, but my understanding is there's nothing that would inherently prohibit somebody from living on the premise. I might defer this over to Planning Manager Trevor Lloyd to confirm or deny that.
Thank you.
The property has a regulatory zone of low-density suburban. That's primarily a residential district, and nothing would prohibit two primary uses on the property as such. And so, although may not be likely, if there is the potential that a residence could be established at this location.
Thank you.
All right, another question?
May we follow that up with the applicant?
Sure, Mr. Troy.
Thank you. For the record, Dennis Troy. Right now, there's no plans for anybody occupying this as a caretaker unit or a residence. With that being said, businesses sometimes do not succeed. Could it be converted in the future over to a residence? Probably. That's not the goal. The goal is to have this as a viable business right now. There would need to be substantial changes to the structure if ultimately they wanted to convert it to a residence and either live in it or sell in it, or sell it. So, thank you.
Mr. Troy, real quick, when they're harvesting, how many employees would it take on the size of property that we're talking about?
From what I spoke to with Mr. De La Montagna, he said it's probably about 4 people.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not there's not a large area. It's about an acre that they need to harvest.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and close that. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone from the public wishing to speak?
Yes, we have Nancy Davis, followed by Pierre Dufy.
Good afternoon. My name's Nancy Davis. I live at 6,000 Rose Rock Lane in Reno, which is about a half a mile due east of where the proposed winery is to go in. I guess I have a lot of unanswered questions. I don't know if they are going to actually cook the grapes there and make the wine. I don't know what kind of, how it's going to affect the air quality. I think my biggest concern where we are, and we've been there for 4 years, we're a couple of 100 yards off of the highway, and the amount of traffic has probably quadrupled in the last 4 years. I've listened to all the traffic studies. I don't believe any of them. The traffic is crazy, and it's taking me a couple of minutes now to pull out onto Mount Rose Highway from our street, which is Thompson. But I also have questions on how, yes, they're going to put up these bear fences and deer fences. Who's going to tell the bears not to cross the highway when they smell this? What are they going to do with all the grape skins and everything? All of this, you don't have to do anything to attract a bear. The bears have eaten a couple of goats right near us. They've broken into chicken coops and taken chickens. I think people forget that we are in their territory. We're in the deer's territory. We're in the bear's territory. The bobcats have been seen regularly lately. We have mountain lions. I don't understand why we are putting a business into a low-density suburban area. That just, it's sort of like an oxymoron. Okay, well, for you, we're going to change the rules, and you can do this here, even though it's zoned this. We will rezone it. And I don't think anybody takes into consideration the impacts of everything else and our wildlife, and that's why we live here. And I don't want anything else attracting the wildlife. We don't have bird feeders up. We don't put our trash out until the morning of trash day. We do everything we can, and we sure enjoy it when they come and visit us on their own. But we sure don't attract them, and I'm just totally opposed to anything that would attract them. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Followed by Ina Katzman.
Good afternoon, members of the Washoe Board of Adjustments. I am not in favor of this proposed winery. As this woman just stated, it is, well, she didn't mention the traffic, but where the buses go, and Chris didn't mention, there's more than one bus. We have, and I mentioned this at the last meeting, we have 400 homes now in Montrose. Most of those homes are now being bought by families. We have many, many children who are below school age now. They are going to be going to school. There is more than one bus. From 2:30, there's one bus around 3 o'clock, and then there's another bus at around 4, dropping children off. That wasn't mentioned. Has this man from NDOT been at Bordeaux when those buses are letting children off? Have they also considered all the traffic that comes out of our other gate, not the Montrose gate, but for all the trucks, for all the workers? Those two streets converge onto Bordeaux. I can see a problem with the trucks coming out this way, the cars coming out this way, and converging, and then there's a bus, and there are women and men parked on both sides of the street, you can't get through, and you don't want to get through. And that means that traffic is going to be backed up on both sides where the buses are letting the children off. That's my first thing. I believe that the 2 acres that the De La Montañas want to build the winery on is just a part of what they really want to do. I believe that it's ludicrous to think that they can plant and harvest grapes on 1 acre of land with such a short growing season. I think that they're planning on buying the additional 12 acres from Stan Jaksic, who owns the land at the end of the road. I understand that the 12 acres are zoned as residential. Are they planning on buying that land and changing the zoning?
Okay, ma'am, you're going to have to wrap it up. We've got other people too. that
Okay,
wanna speak.
one more. If grapes are planted on this land, it will encourage the bears and the deer to feel that this is their garden, and they will be happy to jump over the fence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Peter Durfee, followed by Sue Foltz.
Good afternoon, members of the board. With your permission, I could use a couple extra minutes because I do have a presentation. I believe you have been handled that presentation. If I can't get through it, I would encourage you to review that slide deck.
We'll go ahead and keep it at the 3 minutes. We do have the
Thank you.
the item in front of us.
Thank you. Even without my presentation, the board has already asked some very pointed questions that come into our mind relative to the soundness of the microscopic traffic study, relative to the concept of backdooring wine club functions, which was something the applicant thought he had the availability to do. It now appears that those will become appointments as opposed to events. Without any limitations to that, I'm not sure how the two concepts of limited hours and by appointment during limited hours intersect. I am having a little difficulty, as some of you folks did. In any event, executive summary, the traffic study performed was simply a theoretical construct using data from California wineries and only addressed new trips, additional trips to this potential new winery. The study was performed before any of the traffic and safety concerns were voiced at the 2 public meetings for this project. Traffic study does not address the traffic or public safety concerns voiced, emailed by Montreux neighbors on this proposed project. The data set referenced in one meeting was sorely outdated and ignores significant growth and the changing demographic at Montreux over the last few years. You've heard a significant change in the number of children. When I moved in 6, 7 years ago, I would have 8 kids for Halloween. I have well over 100 now. In terms of the changing demographic, I'm not sure of the count, but there's been significant building, and planning can help, or permitting, significant building in Montreux over the last 3 years. We're talking on the order of 50 additional houses. So I'm not sure about the status quo of the 144 still empty lots. As the meaning and intent, at least the way I read it, of Chapter 110, Article 808, administrative permit, it intends to provide a somewhat higher bar, i.e. a special appraisal, for projects that are not specifically outright approved for the location in a residential, low-density suburban neighborhood. To simply calculate, theoretically, additive trips in a vacuum, I've heard microscopic, I would say the word vacuum, doesn't, to me, appear to meet the project, doesn't meet the intent of what I would consider a more holistic or a special appraisal required by the code. That obviously is which possesses characteristics that require special appraisal in order to determine if the use has the potential to adversely affect land uses, transportations, or facilities in the area. I believe this project has those particular adverse impacts. Data will support that. Even ignoring the fact that the primary business will be to sample alcohol and provide alcoholic beverages for consumption, These additional trips will serve only to compound these existing adverse traffic and safety conditions by introducing additional dangerous left-hand turns specifically required by the current design of the project's proposed traffic flows at already problematic road entry points. As pointed out in one meeting at the South County Library, fatal accidents on Mount Rose Highway, for example, the one at nearby Calhoun Road entry point, have been the result of folks attempting left-hand turns against downhill traffic at similar intersections, where these high-speed downhill stop sign controlled intersections pale by comparison to the safety of proper.
Sir, I took 15 minutes of your time, you took about another 30, so I think we're about even. So we'll go ahead and give others an opportunity to speak, but yes, we do have your information in front of us, and we will definitely take that into account. Thank you.
I greatly appreciate all of you giving me the time.
Next is Sue Foltz, followed by Jean Budke.
Good afternoon. My name is Sue Foltz, and I'm also a neighbor in the Montreux. And just to clarify a couple of things, I did get information from a neighbor whose son was at Pine Middle School last year, and there is an additional bus that was there as of last year. I can't confirm that for this morning, with a 9:02 a.m. pickup and a 4:00 p.m. drop-off. So we just might want to add that to the potential additional school children that would be in that intersection. Secondly, I also want to make a comment. Living on 3 acres in California, having many mule deer, a 7.5-foot and an 8-foot fence will not keep any deer out. We had those fences, and we had so many deer in our 3 acres. So just an FYI, if they are planning on building a fence, it probably should be over 8.5 feet tall. Thirdly, I just have such great concerns about school children with the new middle school being built and those children being bused, people coming in and out after tasting or drinking. They probably will not have, all their senses about them to really adhere to that watch for school children. And I have huge concerns about the word of limited appointments, because that could be open to any subjectivity. And if we can define what a limited amount of occupancy or drinkers that are going to go be there. Right now, it's very willy-nilly. So those are my huge concerns. Also huge concerns for the wildlife, having had a bear in my backyard, just because one night I forgot to close the garage door in my garage and in my backyard. Imagine what having delicious, yummy grape jam would do to attract all those deer and bear. So anyway, huge concerns. Lastly, in my last minute, I do want to say that if this is moving forward, is there any potential of not having the entrance at the Bordeaux Mount Rose Highway interchange? They have plenty of property. There is plenty of opportunity to have them have their own entrance, not near the school children, and wanted just to see if that would be something to be discussed on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jean Budke, followed by Mark Schimpf.
Good afternoon. My name's Jeannie Budke. I also reside in Montreux for this last year, our first year here in northern Nevada. I also have concerns about the traffic on Mount Rose Highway. I moved here from Houston, Texas, the 4th largest city in the country, and I am shocked at the number of serious and even fatal accidents on Mount Rose Highway since we have lived here this last year. Many of them related to alcohol, and this winery provides alcohol, and those drivers will be leaving and driving on Mount Rose Highway. There is no other way about it unless they're my neighbors. And I think this is a very huge safety concern. I agree with the others who've spoken about the bus stop. If you're not familiar with our neighborhood, it's a gated neighborhood, and everybody who picks those children up from the bus must park on Bordeaux Drive right at the entrance to this winery. So everyone who is leaving the winery at the hours that those parents are parked waiting for the bus It's going to be very chaotic. It's already very chaotic. It's a safety concern for those children. It's a safety concern for those parents who are parked on Bordeaux Drive waiting for the bus to arrive. Those are my primary concerns, but I know that the neighbors are not in favor of this. When you read the posts on Nextdoor, everyone who lives in our neighborhood voices opposition. I hope and pray that you will listen to the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Mark Schimpf, followed by Elizabeth Coffey Curl.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Schimpf, and I actually live right in front of the bus stop on Bordeaux Drive. Nobody's going to be affected by this project more than I will. 30 trips a day really equals 60 because there's a dirt road right behind my house. I've been fighting with Montrose since we moved in 2000. They are not very nice neighbors. As far as Montrose is concerned, the dust has been a real problem for me and my family since inception. They say they gave the dirt road to the county. So I fought with the county, and the county says, yeah, they gave it to us, but we didn't accept it. And Stan Jasic will not take care of the dust because he just wipes his hands from it. So that's one thing. I'm concerned about the dust because I agree, there's been a lot of traffic in our area, and we used to only get about 1/8 of an inch of dust on our burgers. Now we get about a half an inch of dust on our burgers when we try to cook out back. There is a winery, or rather a wine bar right across the street. It'll be about 100 yards from this wine tasting. I'm not opposed to it. Even though it's going to affect us, I'm not opposed to the winery. I enjoy wine. However, I am opposed to people in Montreux who will drink on Fridays and Saturdays and speed out right past this bus stop. They have no problem. I also have all of the people that are picking up their kids, and I've been married 43 years and don't have children. But I didn't have a choice to have a bus stop right in front of my house, and to my knowledge, there's only one bus. And it's there about 4 o'clock, and they will line up right in front of my mailbox, right in front of my, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that my, the tail was in your driveway. It's about 3 minutes of frustration when they pick them up. Now, we have 4 kids that just moved in next door to us. They're all under 12 years old. Yeah, 2 of those kids, I think, get on the bus. They probably enjoy having the bus stop right in front of their house. So, I'm concerned how much dust will harvesting create? How much dust will, somebody talked about Halloween. We've been there for 20 years and have had no children there for Halloween. Now, maybe it's because we turn our lights off and pretend that we're not home, but as far as deer and bear, we have had those in our backyard too, but I think we're just in a migratory place. You're not going to stop them. I try to pick up the apples because last year I felt terrible about a bear getting killed on Mount Rose Highway. I thought I was giving them the apples, but I pick them up now. So anyway, thank you for listening to my concern.
Thank you.
Next is Elizabeth Coffey Curl.
Hi, I want to say that I'm actually for this project. I've lived north of this project on the other side of the highway with my family for 21 years, and I've actually worked on the Mount Rose Highway and have traversed it for 21 years. So I'm very familiar with the amount of traffic. I don't agree that it's had substantial increases, and like I said, I've been doing it for over 21 years. One of my positives, or when I saw the plans, I was so impressed with how it matched to the timbers of the area and to the rock and the granite in the area. I felt that they took the building, and they really did due diligence to matching it to our Galena community. And they certainly didn't need to do that, but they really put a lot of effort to do that. And when they're talking about fencing, I personally have a lot of experience with this. We have 5.5 acres. I have a small vineyard. We house anywhere between 25 to 30 hives per year. We also have chickens, and we have other livestock. You might think that I'm just like a radar to mountain lion and any other creature that might want to come down and have a snack. The only problem we have ever had in our 21 years has been with the very rare occasional mountain lion. I have 4-foot and 5-foot fence. I use anti-climb, I use stock fence, and I use split rail. A couple of years ago, we had to put one single strand of hot wire across the top because we were losing some chickens to the mountain lions. Where I live, it is slightly remote. I'm adjacent to the Saddlehorn subdivision, so I get a lot of wildlife near me, but if with the proper fencing, it will deter the wildlife from coming on board. I would encourage, and it was up there, we use Labradors on our property for pets. They certainly can push wildlife away. And there is a large llama breeding facility that's not near here. It's on the other side. It's going up a toll road, Geiger Grade area, but they use Great Pyrenees very successfully. And you'll see them out and you'll see them working. I saw that on the list and I said, absolutely, they do work. It would actually make a very interesting addition to the vineyard business. So thank you for looking at it in a positive. I think it's a positive to the community, and I wouldn't worry about the increased trips. Like I said, I'm a 21-year resident of that community as well as working on the Mount Rose Highway. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We have no further public comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board members for discussion.
Well,
Ms. Hill, you want to go first?
sure, thanks. I think they've done a great job. I went by there today and noticed, went up the dirt road. And regarding the dust, they're going to pave the dirt road, which will cut down significantly on the dust, I would think. Also, the property is on 2 parcels, I believe. And if you built single-family dwellings on that parcel, that would be 20 average daily trips. And this is only 30 average daily trips. So I think it's very similar to a residential use, considering there's 2 parcels there. And I like the fencing they've proposed and the landscaping around the grapes. I think that's going to work out good. And those are my only comments.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
This is a question of process, but I have one additional question for either probably the planner. What's the process for that, or has that been closed?
If you have a question you want to present, we can bring the
Thank you.
the planner back up. Chris, would you please come to the podium?
Thanks, Chris. There was a gentleman talking about the bus stop right in front of his house and the proximity to the site of the applicant. Do we know what that distance is?
No, I did not look into that distance.
Could you offline, you've got
It's about 100 yards.
and that's based on the maps?
No, that's just based on me just going to visit it. And I know that where that street comes down, and that's where the bus stop is, and then you go further down
I've
Berto,
been
then you
there.
go up to the site. So I would say it's about 100 yards. I don't know for sure, if you want to measure it.
I don't know for sure, but I do not have the capabilities to do that with my phone.
So does 100 yards sound about right?
I don't want to spitball and say 300 and it be 200, or 300, say 500. So I don't know that I am readily, willing to answer that. I just don't know.
Thank you, though.
I have been there also, and I'm not too sure of the distance proper. I
this-
don't know if it's the length of a football field, but
Like if these are the sites,
hold on, before you, if you're gonna use that, you should probably put it up on the screen so
Oh,
everybody
well.
can see it. That'd be,
Exhibit F.
Because I thought we did have scale maps several times. And for the record, I've been there as well.
This map.
That map.
Um,
I will find it.
oh, Exhibit F is all the comments.
Yeah,
So,
let's,
if you would, it is an Exhibit F, and it's closer towards the back end.
okay.
I think it's about, there's a bunch of colored photos, and it should be the first one, I believe, you come to.
I see the image that you,
it's the only, it doesn't show the bus stop, but it shows, like, you could extrapolate where the bus stop is.
There's-
Yes. 190014. Oh,
That's just the, that's the
That's the-
admin number.
that's the project number.
It should be attached, actually, I think it was a.
if you would like to give me a
fee, I
couple
think it was
minutes.
attached to his documents.
I see that, and I saw that, but I do not, it does not have any measurements.
Would you please put it down so everybody can at least see it, so the audience can at least see what we're talking about?
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Hill, do you have a question on that, or Mr. Stanley?
Yeah, again, the question was the approximate distance between the bus or buses stop area or areas and the site itself.
May I propose another
And I don't
option?
think we can get that out of the documents that we have. I believe Chris already has mentioned that he doesn't have that knowledge on that. So you'll have to rely on your memory when you
Guesstimate,
visit.
yep.
Members of the board, so there may be another option we can utilize, but it would potentially require a couple minutes recess. If the computers where Donna is sitting do have access to the internet, I can access the regional mapping system and get you pretty much close to 1 yard discrepancy. If
I
this
don't know
is,
how critical that is. I'll see if Mr. Stanley, in fact, needs that to help him render a decision.
I would like to have that.
Would you?
I would.
Okay. I'll tell you what then. Why don't we go ahead, can you get it to us in 5 minutes?
I'll be doing it right there, so probably less.
Okay, so why don't we take about 5 minutes? It's about time anyway, and we'll come back at about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, about 13 after, about 3:13. going here? This is. Trevor, we need Donna back before we start. Okay. So how you been?
Good, good, good. Just had a friend visiting up from Corralitos. You know where that is? By Santa Cruz?
Oh, Santa Cruz, yeah.
And,
Santa Cruz used to be an old stomping ground for me as a
yeah.
young lad.
Yeah, me too.
In fact, a friend of mine, his parents had a place right there. It's called, what, Twin Lakes? Just south of the actual boardwalk.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
We used to hang
That's
out
like
there.
17th Street.
Oh, yeah, we used to hang out there all the
Yeah, me too. I lost a turquoise bracelet at that beach.
I think I found it.
Yeah. Um, but we did the bike trail from Incline to Sand Harbor. That's really nice. Yeah, it's beautiful. You guys got to do it.
I guess the only thing I heard that they're having a little bit of an issue with is the,
Heat.
The heat, the bridge tends to burn the dogs, or can
Yeah.
burn the dogs.
They have put wagons there to put your dog in a wagon.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Where's this?
The trail, the pedestrian bike trail from Incline to Sand Harbor. It has this bridges bridging over the lake. It's pretty neat.
That sounds kind of cool. City code, you think, maybe?
I think it's business license.
Okay.
Or chapter 31 of the town, either chapter 25 or 30. So I just, I'm not able to find it.
But it's not in our bucket of things to worry or to address or to.
Pretty cool.
Okay, as long as. You know, you can tell where I am on this.
Wow.
These guys are.
That's only to
It's a
the,
professional operation. Where they think they're playing
the property.
with a little bit in there. But in terms of transparency and so forth, and their longer term plans, I could put this all together and you know, we're not gonna have many, whatever market we follow, can we condition it?
All right, if we can bring this back. All right, we'll be back in session here. Mr. or Chris, why don't you come up here and if you could answer the question that Mr. Stanley proposed as to the distance.
Sure. So thank you for allowing us to look into that. So I measured 2 points. I measured from what we believe to be the bus stop to the cul-de-sac as being approximately 221 feet. That's to the cul-de-sac where the entrance to the access for the winery would be. And then we also measured as the crow flies from the bus stop to the property line for the winery would be 686 feet.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question, Mr. Stanley?
It does, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Any further discussion you have on?
Not on that issue, no, thank you.
Let me, thank you, Chris, we appreciate that. Any further discussion from either of you?
On this particular issue or period?
No, on this, we brought this back basically as a board discussion to either approve or deny or take
Right.
action on
Right,
this.
right, right. So, one of the problems that, let me preface that by saying the applicant has done, again, a very good job of trying to listen to the community concerns and address them to a greater or lesser extent. And yet, a couple of issues, one being the location of the bus stops and how that's going to be dealt with. And so far, we hear no resolution on that, other than the assumption is everybody's sensible, and that's a fun assumption. But of course, that's the one you have to use. Coming back to it, though, we ask about a dozen ways. What is an appointment? What is an event? And how many people will actually be there at any given time? And we never got an answer to that, or not one that I understood or could put a numeric to. And just cutting to the chase here, I'm going to suggest that we explore the idea of conditioning, which I understand we may be able to do, around occupancy, a maximum number of folks being served at any given time as a condition, because right now, the way it's set up, appears to be extremely open-ended and possibly to the detriment and certainly to the concern of the neighbors.
Thank you. Make sure we're on here. First of all, to Mr. Troy, I agree. I think you've done a good job of presenting this to the board. I believe you've made attempted to make some changes that would satisfy the community in so doing. However, in the 5 years that I have been on this board, I can tell you in all honesty, this is the one time where I have had the most input from the public on an issue. This item came before the board last month, and at that time, within the documentation, there were 20 people opposed to it and there were 9 people in favor of it. This time, on the documentation that was supplied, again on a staff report, there were 25 people that were opposed to it and the same number of 9 that were in favor of it. If you take those two into account, and you try not to double up the individuals that responded both in August and in September, I had a number of 31 individuals that were opposed at that time between those two documents. Today, when I got here, there was an additional 13 emails that opposed this project, and we had the planner come up and say that he also had received an additional 7, which brings that number up to 51 individuals that had opposed this project.
I apologize. So there were additional emails and phone calls for support, roughly 3 additional. Those individuals did request that their items not be a part of the public record, so they were left out. However, I wanted to at least set that record that there were 3 additional that were in support.
Thank you. I was going to go there next, but thank you for clarifying those numbers. At the same time, on the support side, there was 11 plus the 3, so there was 14. So there's 14 people in favor of this, and there's 51 people against this. Of the 14 people that were in favor of it, when I was going through the actual exhibits, 6 of them at least that I was aware of, other than the separate packet I just received, were individuals that were either club members to the winery or had visited the winery. There were people in support of this that lived in Truckee, California. There were people in support of this that lived in Hidden Valley. So although we take that into account, they were really not individuals that are actually impacted by the location of where this is going to be. On the other hand, the 51 that I have here, at least 31 I can account for that were actually impacted because of living in the area specific. Given that, that is for me, it's a very strong statement that the community is not in favor of having this at this location. And I do believe that as a board, we have to take all things into account. And as spoken earlier, I do have some concerns about what is an appointment versus, what is a special event. I do have concerns about the school bus being there and the future of 140 homes at 10 trips, 1,400 trips coming in and out of there. So I have trouble making a finding in favor at this time for this project. But that is, that's my opinion on that. Any other input from the board? Ms. Hill?
Well, I'd just like to kind of remind you of the owner that was here at the last meeting. He was at the Eddie. He owned the Eddie Restaurant right there on the river downtown. And he was saying how, people assume the worst scenario, and they thought that their bar was going to, provide trash and is going to do all these horrible things, and it ended up being a great asset to the community. And I have a feeling that this is kind of the situation with this winery. I don't think 30 trips is going to be impacting this neighborhood as much as they think it is. And the parents that come and pick up their kids from the bus, it just drives me crazy that people do that. I mean, the kids, they don't allow their kids to walk home, or, they don't. So it's like parents are just lining up out of schools too, taking their kids to school. At least these kids are taking the bus. But I don't see how it seems so far away from the bus stop that, the road and the actual operations itself is 600 feet away from the bus stop. So the people will come down the gravel road, which will be paved, and, there'll be a signage saying, watch out for the kids, and it's only a certain hours of certain days, and I don't think it's that big of a impact as their fear of the unknown is.
Mr. Stanley?
Under the fear of the unknown, I think we've all seen a similar project. I know I saw it through 3 CAB meetings, I think, or more, where one of the actual CAB members was trying to convert a store on Mount Rose Highway into a wine purveying group and or venue. And there was tons of concern about getting onto and off of Mount Rose Highway. It was on a straightaway, not on a curve. After it was in place, there was as I recall, a request for music. The neighborhood requested that not be the case, and I think the resolution on that was non-amplified music. And there was a huge hue and cry about dark sky lighting and so forth. So, and that's several hundred yards away. So right in that area, I don't know about the fellow down on the river, but the fellow across the street had a great deal of issues to overcome and is still in process. And going back to the idea about how close, whether or not we like the way people pick up their kids at school, there is, I believe, a Washoe County statute in place that stipulates how far from a bus stop a cannabis operation can be. We asked Mr. Lloyd during the break, recess, how about a liquor dispensing venue in its closeness to bus stops. And we know of one case where there was, a project was actually overruled because it was too close. All right, but I understand that, if I'm correct here, Trevor, that appears to be a city statute and not a county statute, or is that it's not an NRS statute, though?
No, that's code, but it's a business license statute. It's, I believe, Chapter 25. It's not Chapter 110, which is under the Development Code.
Did it stipulate what the actual distance was?
I apologize, I don't have that language in front of me.
Okay, thank you then.
Although if I could, I believe we have our director of planning and building here that would like to address the issue of the occupancy, if we could.
Great. Thank you very much.
You can hit your button one more time for us, I think?
Can you hear me?
Now.
Yes. The occupancy seemed to come up a couple
I'm
times.
sorry, can you just state your name for us?
Yes, Moira Howenstein, Division Director for Planning and Building. I heard the word occupancy loading being a concern, so I wanted to step in to give you some information. What we would do under the building permit when the winery comes in at that point, after the planning process, we would look at the floor plan and we would assess under the 2018 building code, which is the International Building Code currently adopted, we would look at how the layout is presented. There are occupancy loads that apply to the bar area if there is a counter. There are different occupancy loads that are applied to the kitchen. Obviously, those are much bigger. It's about 100 square feet per person. And then they are accounted for cumulatively. And there will be a maximum occupancy load put onto the structure. And so that is defined by the building division through the building permit process. So every permit goes through that, whether it's a winery or an office. We don't do that for residences because the code doesn't apply through those mechanisms and those calculations to the residential single-family dwelling. However, it does apply to the winery in this instance. So I guarantee that there will be that process when they come in. And I just wanted to let you know that currently we can't calculate it, but we will definitely do that at the time of building permit issuance. And I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Hill?
Yes, Maura, does the number of parking spaces come into figure? Because there are going to be 16 parking spaces.
Right, so parking is really defined by planning.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's kind of backwards.
Mr. Stanley?
Thank you for that. So the idea of conditioning with occupancy, it sounds like that dog won't hunt, that cannot be done because the report and the assessment takes place later. So how would you, there was some discussion earlier about whether or not a condition about occupancy could be made now, an added condition. Can that be done?
I would defer to Trevor and our legal counsel. However, my understanding is that we usually don't condition what is in code. So the prescriptive codes are adopted by building. That's already something that's there. Conditions are usually for special circumstances beyond straight code, which is what we call prescriptive code. So I think that would be a conflict. But again, I will leave that up to our legal counsel and Trevor Lloyd.
And Mike, go ahead and jump in if I'm answering incorrectly. It's territory that's a little shaky to go down. And Director Howenstein was correct that it is in code, and we try not to condition code. And I know that there can be conditions that are more restrictive than code. However, we need to be a little careful that we're not singling out one particular use and one particular property owner, and requiring more restrictive standards than we would for another property owner. But I don't know if, Mike, you wanted to chime in too.
I concur completely with what both Myra and Trevor have said on that.
Thank you. Any further discussion amongst the board? Mr. Stanley?
The hope on the occupancy condition, my intent there was to try to bound this operation in some way, since it's so open-ended and ambiguous at this point, in terms of the impact it's going to have. How fast is it going to grow? How many people? What's an event? What's an appointment? Why increase from 5 to 16 parking places? All of those sort of issues that we've heard addressed in words, but not numerically. So I would like to know from the board what your thoughts on, assuming we can even do that in a judicious way, in a way theoretically agreed to by the applicant, what is the board's appetite for such a condition?
I would leave it up to the experts, the building department. That's my comment.
I guess my comment would be is that the applicant was kind enough to continue this once before to make changes and for conditions, and to sit there now to make additional conditions after he's gone away and done that, I think is putting a little bit of an undue hardship on him for that. I think what we have is, we have a document before us, we have a staff report, and I think with that, we could probably take a vote with what we know at this point in time. That's my opinion.
All right.
I concur.
Okay. Any other further discussion on this? I will entertain a motion if someone wishes to make one.
I will make one, if I can find the.
You want that?
Okay. I move that after given reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WADMIN 18-0014 for Dennis and Tina de la Montoya, having made all five findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Development Code Section 110.808.25. Including consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Crickets.
But
Hearing
it seems
none.
like there's a trend, so the correct number would be WADMIN 19-14, but I do see in the motion that
Yeah,
it does
it
state
says on the
18.
motion, we've been through this, but yes, okay, we'll correct that on the document here. Okay, one more time, is there a second? If not, the motion fails for lack of a second. I'll entertain another motion then. I will make the motion. I move that after giving reasoned consideration for the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment deny the administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0014 for Dennis and Tina de la Montaña, having failed to make all five findings in accordance with the Washoe County Development Code Section 110.808.25, and that being number 3, site suitability. There's
I second that motion.
second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay?
Okay, motion carries 2-1 with Ms. Hill. It was a nay motion. Thank you. Mr. Lloyd, would you please read the, I know you've done it once, but would you please read the appeal process?
Will do. Most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the next item, which is C on the agenda, WBLD 18-105119 Schmidt Appeal. Mr. Lloyd.
Back on. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Lloyd with Planning and Building. This is an appeal, actually it's for action, hearing, and discussion to approve or deny the appeal from Mr. Gary Schmidt of the decision of the Air Quality Management Division relating to the removal of materials from the Reindeer Lodge per building permit number WBLD 18-105119. On August 20th, the Planning and Building Division received an appeal from Mr. Gary Schmidt relating to a current building permit. And the description of that permit, and I'll read it to you, was to provide investigative work to include recovery of the historical building materials for repurposing and assessment of the lodge portion damaged by snow and possible removal of damaged portions of roof debris with installation of a non-bearing weather-resistant end wall following the phase of contractor applying for permits for any structure repair or stabilization. Staff is recommending a denial of this request essentially for two reasons. First reason is that, quite frankly, staff did not receive any justification or support for the appeal. The information received really didn't go into much detail at all in terms of what the appeal was, or what the appellant was even appealing in the building permit, other than their decision regarding the removal and handling of materials, and the decision of the Air Quality Management Division staff. Secondly, the staff of Air Quality Management Division is tasked with enforcing federal rules and guidelines with regard to the removal of asbestos material, and that's the material in question here. We have no individuals on staff that have the qualifications to determine whether or not the interpretation from the staff at Air Quality is correct. And for that, staff is simply recommending denial of this appeal. And we do have the staff available, both Mike Wolf and Josh, sorry, I'm going to get your name wrong, are both here from Air Quality Division, and they can answer any technical questions that you may have. I believe the appellant is also here to provide his rationale for the appeal. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Lloyd?
No.
Thank you. Well, at this time, why don't we go ahead and bring up Air Quality, or I'm sorry. Wait, Air Quality, why don't you hold off? Mr. Schmidt, why don't you come up and talk? I just was trying to get a kind of a chronological order of this so we're all on the same page. We'll let you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to request a continuance of this matter based on several points. Number one is I would request that when this is heard, if it's heard, it be before the full board. And I think I'm placed at a distinct disadvantage on the partial board. And I think the precedence is for the Board of Adjustment and for all the boards in Washoe County that any applicant or appellant, if he so desires, can be granted basically an automatic continuance based upon not a full panel not being there. But furthermore, there's on the 21st of August, I submitted a public records request to Trevor Lloyd for various documents, and you have it in your file in the staff report. And among other things, well, let me give you a little background on the public records report request. On the 20th, I met an extensive meeting with Sarah Tone, which I'd had numerous conversations with previously, and with Mr. Lloyd to discuss this matter. And this is still under discussion between my engineering company and Air Quality, and we haven't resolved some of the issues. Some of the issues are agreed upon at this point in time. But at that meeting, in order to preserve my rights for the appeal process, that it didn't toll my time to appeal, I attempted to place an appeal before the Board of Adjustment, which I and legal counsel was firmly believe that is the proper process. But at the meeting on the 20th, Mr. Lloyd and Sarah Tone said this could not be appealed before the Board of Adjustment. And we had extensive discussions about the portions of the letter from Mr. Ristori that were of concern to us, and the portions that weren't, and you have that letter in your package. But a lot of the discussion then went to, I was told this is not a matter that can be heard before you. So I submitted the appeal in any event. I was told it's not the proper forum. I submitted this public records request the next day, which requesting, among other things, policy, procedures, forms, and legal citations in support of those opinions that it could not be heard before this board. That's a clear public records request. State law, NRS 239, requires that the body respond within 5 days in great detail. They've failed to do so. They're now in violation of state law. And I need the response to that public records request in order to properly prepare myself for an ultimate appeal here. What happened instead, we left that meeting, and I was told that let's schedule a meeting with Seratone and Trevor Lloyd and other persons, perhaps Dave Salerno, who's also involved in this project. He's visited the site, and I've had several discussions with him about it. We're going to have a meeting the next week. Well, that would be on the 24th or 25th. I told him I was going to be out of town most of the week, but I'd be in town for 2 or 3 days the middle of the week, and let me just try and schedule at that time period. I came back into town, made several calls about a meeting, and got no responses from my calls. I left several messages. At this point in time, we're still talking about the process, whether it can or should be heard before this body or some other body unknown to myself or my counsel. And then I left town again, and yesterday, I was out of town. Yesterday, I got a call from Trevor. He left a message that a hearing was scheduled today. First I knew about it. I exchanged messages with Trevor, finally got him this morning, and he couldn't really tell me what sort of notice I've got or what had happened and whether, how the package, the staff recommendation had been sent to me. He said, assumed it was mailed. I did go to my mailbox this morning and picked it up, so that's the first I've got of it. I have an engineer, actually one of the principals from Nova, formerly Pezzanella, been in the community for 40 years, with me today, but he's not really prepared either. And in addition to all that, we had sent a letter in response to, if I may, Josh's letter to Dave Salerno, to Josh, to Seratone, and that letter is dated the 19th, and we haven't received any response from that. And we sent that letter multiple times and noted this morning that it was not in the packet. I assumed that Sarah would put it in the packet. She was there at that meeting. I told her I'd get it to her. But you just got that letter today, and I'd ask whether any of you had had time to study it, let alone read it, or read it, let alone study it. So another reason for a continuance, you don't have all the evidence. I don't have all the evidence to present because the department has failed to respond to my public records request. You haven't received that evidence, and we're blindsided by this thing. Just really got effective notice today that this hearing was going to proceed, and so we're going to be shooting in the dark here. We have scheduled, I believe, at least we understand we have scheduled, and I missed who was here with Josh, but a meeting with Mike Wolf, the branch chief of air quality, for Tuesday. There may be a strong tentative meeting. I know it was talked about Monday, but it's supposed to be on Tuesday. And I think these matters may be resolved short of a highly technical presentation to you here by a lot of engineers and probably a couple of lawyers or two. And so I think the best thing is to continue this matter on the basis of the notice, on the basis of the failure to respond to the public records request, just reiterating, and the process certainly is less than to be desired. And I think we all have the same goal in mind, that the Ranger Lodge be, those portions that are severely damaged be removed in compliance with all federal regulations. The issue is, what are the federal regulations that apply? And what is the process to apply them? I would note that from the little brief staff report for such a highly technical matter, it says that my appeal was not supported. It says no support, justification, or rationale for this appeal. Well, I could make the same argument of the letter from Josh. There's no support, justification, or rationale for their position. They cite no specific federal regulation, no case law, no factual basis other than my report. It says that the Air Quality Mediation Division has determined that asbestos is present. That's not disputed, and they didn't determine that asbestos was present. I did. So my engineers that I hired, I paid for the report. They were present at the time the sampling was taken, but there's no dispute asbestos is present. The question is how it's at what level it's regulated. And there's no dispute that there's very little dispute that some of it is regulated. There's a major dispute, or, not a meeting of the minds on other parts of it, whether it's regulated or not. A lot of it goes to this 1% criteria, which in federal regulations, which says that material of greater than 1% is regulated if it's greater than 1% asbestos. But how do you define material? There's, as a result of the collapsed roof, there's kind of a pile of rubble out there that was pulled a little bit away from the building to keep the rest of the building from collapsing. And that is far less than 1%, probably less than 1% of 1%. So we don't think it's regulated under federal law. But the initial position that the air quality has taken, that since there are individual little pieces in there, that the individual little piece has more than 1%. Therefore, that whole 40 yards of material has to go out as regulated. We don't think that's what the law says. And I would agree that with the people that are here today, first of all, I don't think we have a lawyer present other than your counsel. And I would ask, I guess, whether he's an expert in federal regulations when it comes to, air quality control related to asbestos in any type of construction work or demolition. We haven't heard anything from legal, from air quality, just a blanket statement. And I would say they're the ones that haven't supported anything claims they've made at all. We have some citations in our letter that you just recently received, but rather than going on and on, I'm requesting a continuation at this point in time. I think it's justified on the fact that there's only 3 board members here, and that's usually a routine continuance granted if the appellant or the applicant requests it. So, would anyone have any questions?
When do you plan on cleaning it up?
As soon as we get these issues settled. Right now, I've been given a verbal stop work, if you would. There's a question whether that's even legal, but I'm adhering to it because I'm trying to be over-cooperative. There are some things up there. As an example, there's a pile, it's not a pile like this, it's an area where there's probably 30 pieces of scrap metal, there are stoves, there are flue pipes, and, metal that's been, basically removed from the main structure 40, 50 feet. And that was all tested, or at least Joshua was on site, and everything he wanted tested was tested. And that scrap metal has been deemed to be not subject. And I'd like to remove it. I've been trying to get permission to remove it for a month. There are other portions of the building that are deemed, tested negative, that I could do some additional work on the building, but I've been prohibited by air quality. I think, it says in their letters that no work to proceed until we come up with a big old master plan. Well, the big old master plan, worst case scenario, may be 3 years, may be not decided by this board, not decided by air quality, maybe decided by the Nevada Supreme Court or federal court or the 9th District or somebody else. But in the meantime, I'd like to work on the things that they're not in dispute. Take that scrap metal off the property. There's some overhangs on the building that have very valuable, at least historically and otherwise, they're 2-inch by 12-inch resawn cedar that's nearly 100 years old, that's in great demand, and it came from the Reindeer Lodge. And the report shows there's no asbestos anywhere in that material. The shingles, they were suspect. The shingles have all been tested. There's shingles laying about on the ground. There's some little piles of shingles, that are tested negatively. I could remove those. So some work could proceed, but I hopefully we've been unable to arrange for a face-to-face meeting with air quality. And my period for appeal was tolling, so I had to put the appeal in. I don't want to be here today. My engineer does, this is way premature, and we don't have the facts, we don't have the information in front of us, and we don't know what we agree to and what we don't agree to. And so I would, respectfully request that on the basis of any of those things I outlined, this thing should be continued to the next meeting. And if it's not settled by then, you're going to see a whole bunch of engineers and a whole bunch of lawyers out here. I'll be sitting in a very back row, but believe me, I don't want to go there. Thank you.
I do have a couple questions.
Yes.
There's actually a couple. You're not disputing the fact that there is asbestos on that site. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's my report that I paid for by this engineering firm that determined it.
Which engineering firm was it?
It's Nova.
Okay, we have their report here, and Nova actually came out and located at least 2 areas in which the first floor exterior under cedar paneling contained 15%, and the collapsed acoustic ceiling on the south side of the building contained 15%.
Yes.
And that is from their report, correct?
My report. Yeah.
That's right, their report, your
Yeah,
report.
yeah.
Okay. So it's not an issue at all that you have asbestos that needs to be cleaned up. And there was you had a document in your possession back in June 25th from Joshua that addressed these issues. So it's not like you were surprised at the last minute that this took place. Is that correct also?
Yeah, and there were various conversations and emails and stuff going back and forth during that time period, and we officially responded to that on the, I believe it's the 19th and you have that document for the first time this morning. It was sent multiple times, and we have not received a response to that. I don't know, maybe they're willing to accept our position. They haven't said no. We've agreed to that in part, but one of the issues is there's this 40 yards of material that has got traces of matter, individual matters in there that test more than 1%. But it's material. So regulations say any material that tests greater than 1% is regulated. If it's less than 1%, it's not. That material, 40 yards, is way, way less than 1%. It's probably around 1% of 1%, or 1/100th of 1%. And we're ready, willing, and able to remove that. But until we settle that issue, and that's what I believe is going to be discussed on Tuesday, if that issue gets settled and we're given permission to remove it, we'll remove it. But we've been told, don't do anything until we settle everything. Well, that makes things difficult. It makes things difficult. I think we should proceed on the things we agree with and then work on the things we don't agree with.
Okay,
And
let me,
it would limit the amount of things coming before you also.
Let me interrupt you here, and you're asking for a continuance, and it's predicated upon at least two issues that I believe I wrote down here. One, that we don't have a full board here. Is that correct?
That's one.
Okay. Although we have a quorum, you're saying you
understand that.
prefer to have a full board. And two is also predicated upon that evidently on 8/21, you asked for public record request, and you haven't received it. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. But you were also out of town for a while here, so some of this stuff actually was mailed to you, but you being out of town, you weren't able to pick it up.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that right?
5-day notice, and that, I have the postmark here, it's dated the 30th.
Okay.
That it was mailed. And I was in there, I had numerous conversations with Sarah and Trevor.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out
Yeah.
what we've got in front of us, so.
Yeah, and there was.
With that, hang on.
So short notice is also.
Okay. Mr. Stanley, do you have a question?
I do, and it's a follow-up to yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schmidt, I'm not really sure if you're here to argue your case or to ask for a continuance. Which is it, please?
Well, they asked to continue. I'm not prepared to argue the case.
All right. And so you're requesting a continuance?
Continuance, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. That's all right now. We might call you back up in a couple of minutes if we have any more questions.
Could I possibly ask a question of council?
Well, council works for us.
No, but it's a procedural question.
Well, why don't you
Well, I'll
direct
ask
it,
it
why
of
don't
you.
you direct it to me and I'll see if.
I know if the question I have, because I don't have legal counsel here either, but the question I have, and maybe the chairperson can answer it, if this were denied without prejudice, would my time period to appeal period be told? And I could then, if this is not settled in the next week or 2 or 3 or 4, I could reappeal, and I would not be beyond the statutory limits of my time to appeal that original letter. That original letter is suspect also, but I don't want to get the lawyers involved in this thing if I can avoid it. The original letter was not a letter.
Okay, but.
It was an email.
We're back to the
was an
question
email.
that you asked. Okay.
Okay.
And we
Thank
haven't
you.
made a decision yet on that, so.
Say again?
I said we haven't made a decision yet on that, but if we decide, if it does go the path of denial, we'll make sure that everything is out on the table of what your rights are, should we go down that path.
Yeah, well,
Okay?
I hope we can continue this matter. I think it would be the most expeditious way to get this thing moving again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can the, a member or representative basically from air quality come up? State the name for the record.
Mike Wolf, for the record. I am the Enforcement Branch Chief for Washoe County Air Quality Management. I want to start by addressing the first question that was raised is who has authority over what? Air Quality Management Division is delegated direct authority from the US EPA. We operate under the umbrella of the Health Department, but our regulatory authority is provided by the federal government and written in the Code of Federal Regulations. Mr. Schmidt asked about paths forward if he doesn't agree with our decision. There are several paths he could take. He could appeal to EPA Region 9. We've been in close contact with them. They are completely supportive of our approach in this case because our whole desire is to protect public health. We want to get everything cleaned up properly. We're bound by law, that's federal law, that is referenced in the email that Josh sent to Mr. Schmidt and his consultant. And that is NESHAP, which is the National Emission Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants, Subpart M. We're delegated to administer that program. And under that program, EPA is very clear on how to handle situations like this. They are very clear in stating that piles of debris like this can't be aggregated. So it's supported, there's lots of precedent for it. They're also welcome to appeal our local regulations through requesting a variance from the District Board of Health. That is all available online as well. Or in the event that nothing happens, we can write them a citation and then they can appeal that in front of the Air Pollution Control Hearing Board. All those methods are available. Whichever is chosen is fine with me. I don't have anything in this except that I'm trying to protect public health and enforce the law as it's written. So I apologize, I didn't write down all of his statements. The letter that he references requesting consideration, we didn't receive that, unfortunately, until Thursday evening, right before I was leaving to go home. And the only reason I found it was Moira actually asked what my response to the letter was, and my response was, what letter? I had never received it. Josh had never received it. It's written with Josh's name and address at the top. It is dated the 19th, but when I came over here, we have still not received that letter in email or hard copy. We received it Thursday evening from Moira. So really the first time I had time to sit down and really look at it was Friday. So I don't know what happened. We can blame the US mail, I suppose. What was? Yeah, we have prepared a response. We have been trying to set up meetings with Mr. Schmidt since June. For whatever reason, they seem to get put back or not responded to. We have had one meeting with his consultant, one of the principals from that consulting firm, an abatement company, and a demolition company. The result of that meeting was to prepare a abatement plan, a removal and abatement plan. And I say it that way because a lot of the debris can be removed. Nobody has said that nothing on that property can't be removed. Our advice is don't touch anything until the plan is finished so that everybody understands what's happening. We're just trying to make things clear and easy. Josh's email was intended to be a little less formal. It was an email. It didn't cite all of the regulations being covered. We can do that, and we can move forward doing that. But again, everything we're doing is federal law. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations. And there's a lot of precedent for asbestos removal in this country. So, does the board have any questions for me?
Any questions? Mr. Stanley?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. Obviously, the applicant has asked for the ability to have more time on this, and it sounds like if you've been working since June, you might be a little suspect of that, it sounded like perhaps. But in terms of time passing, as it relates to public health, there's asbestos in the aggregated amounts.
Right.
Some less than 1%, some as much as 15, kind of in certain areas. Where does that, as time progresses, where does that asbestos go? Or what is the public danger, public health issue, which you rightfully, I think, point out is your major goal? How does time work with that?
Well, our biggest concern for public health impact, obviously, would be acute well, not acute, actually, it's chronic respiratory. You know, if this gets in the air and you breathe it in, everybody knows, you see the ads on TV all the time. Every day you're homesick from work, you know, there it is. Mesothelioma, asbestosis. Asbestos is dangerous. In the form it's in right now, in that pile, we're not as concerned about it right now. What we are concerned about is the movement, disposal of it, or over time, what's going to happen to that pile. If we go through another winter like we just had, that pile is going to be dispersed everywhere. And that needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed before winter. And that's what our ultimate goal is how can we get this cleaned up?
So, given things like the big storm we had last night, what kind of effect, if any, would that heavy downpour kind of rain have any effect on asbestos or?
Ultimately, what's going to happen is the material is slowly going to move, and it will slowly move into the soil.
Okay.
That is a concern that we have discussed is it going to impact the soil? At some point it will, and there are limits and there are calculations that EPA uses, and it could actually trigger CERCLA. Okay. So it could deem that whole site contaminated.
If I may, one more.
Yes, please.
From your point of view, request for continuance and the time with a date certain theoretically associated with that continuance, is there a significant increased health risk from the time involved in a continuance?
In my opinion, it's hard. I'm not an industrial hygienist. I would say that over the course of the next week, we're not likely to have a major public health risk, but you never know what's going to happen between now and then. But the longer we wait, the worse it is. If we can get the material cleaned up properly soon, tomorrow, would be best for everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Wolf, don't go away. Mr. Large, I'm going to come to you. We've already kind of had a discussion about this, but under that last sentence, that if they are applying the federal standards to remove the asbestos, then it basically becomes out of the hands of the Board of Adjustment to make a determination on this. Is that, help me out here, I guess. If they are following, if they are basically blessed by the feds and they are following federal guidelines, then does the Board of Adjustment need to be involved in this? Or does this denial stand on its own and move forward from there?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Large from the Washoe County District Attorney's Office, for the record. It's a good question. The posture of this appeal is difficult because Mr. Schmidt has asked for this appeal to the Board of Adjustment dealing with the building permit that is in question. Air quality management, the item that is before you is air quality management's decision under the federal regulations. This board is pursuant to the power under Chapter 278 and Washoe County Code, is empowered to make a determination if they believe that the air quality management is misinterpreting federal regulations. This board has the power to say, we believe you're misinterpreting federal regulations, and to approve the appeal. Or if they believe that the air quality management is properly interpreting regulations, then they can deny the appeal. If they were, in regard to Mr. Schmidt's question earlier, in regard to a denial without prejudice, I believe I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Mike Wolf.
Mike Wolf. Mr. Wolf has illustrated there are many different remedies in regard to appeal process under the federal regulations, both to the EPA and to the health district, that would be appropriate for that purview. This board's purview is under Chapter 278 and Chapter 110 to look at the building aspect of this and the permit that is in question. In this case, air quality has come through and said, we believe they are outside federal regulations, they're in violation, and therefore, if this board agrees with that interpretation, then the proper would be to deny the appeal. If they believe that the air quality is overstepped, what the federal regulations have said, then this board can approve the appeal.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf, obviously, you are tasked with following federal regulation, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's, I mean, that's the, your division or department is tasked with that?
Yes, every day.
And I'm just going to ask a couple questions here. And in so doing that, do you guys have training on federal regulations at all?
Yes, in fact, 4 of my staff just went to the EPA inspector NESHAP asbestos training last week. And they went to, what was the other NESHAP training you guys just went to? Yeah, I mean, they go to a refresher annually.
Okay.
But we did just go to the EPA inspector training.
So you've had training in asbestos? And
Extensive.
It's ongoing, there's
Yes.
CEUs or whatever that, to keep you
Yes.
up to speed. The regulations that are in force and effect for asbestos, do they change very often? Or are they usually more or less pretty static, or there's a baseline that everything builds from or follows?
The NESHAP and Subpart M, which regulates asbestos, is in the CFR. If you know the CFR, it doesn't move quickly. Doesn't change often. In fact, when was the last time they revised? 1990. So-
And have you or your agents or your division dealt with asbestos in the past?
Yes.
And you have experience in that area as to the proper way of disposal following the federal guidelines?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. The applicant has asked for a continuance. How receptive would the AQMD, with you, under your leadership, be to a continuance?
Again, for me, we're moving forward with how we're moving forward. We're going to hopefully have that meeting on Tuesday and come up with some kind of resolution then. And then continuing would be irrelevant. I mean, it'd be moot. I don't know if the board hears it again, what will change. Our stance, our communications, like I said, we've been in communications with EPA about this case. So.
And one last one. Have you ever had this situation in front of the Board of Adjustment before in terms of a denial? This process, have you ever, has your path ever come down our particular lane before?
No. Nor have I heard it coming this direction. I wasn't sure what to expect out of this evening.
Thank you.
And again, I guess the point of clarification is even if there is continuance granted, the denial is still in force and effect for him to take any action. Because what we're saying is your division has basically denied him to do anything with the property. That's where we stand right now. He's appealing that decision to us. If we, in fact, do a continuance, it stands force and effect that everything stays status quo and there is no movement on that property until it comes back before us. Ms. Large, is that kind of a correct assumption?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Larch for the record, yes, that is a correct assumption, that the status quo would be maintained. My shooting from the hip here, which lawyers hate to do, is the decision that would be made at a meeting on Tuesday would then be appealable to either the health department, the EPA, or to this board if the continuation of thing. So that goes to Mr. Schmidt's question in regard to a denial without prejudice, allow him to maintain this. But once again, I don't want to overstep there. This board is empowered to make the decision that is before it today under that is itemized on the agenda.
And Mr. Large, we don't need to have a full board present to make this decision, is that correct, as long as we have a quorum?
Nothing in the open meeting law requires that the full board be present. It's obviously preferable, but the quorum is sufficient.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Stanley?
May I ask a question of legal as well? Mr. Large, perhaps I missed this in your last statement, but under what conditions, given a denial, non-denial, or a continuance, would a resolution that they would come to by themselves on Tuesday be valid? In other words, is there anything that we're going to do here that will impede them from getting together Tuesday and working through the traditional channels, I would assume?
Based on my understanding, there would be nothing that would impede them from getting together on Tuesday.
So, if I may, if we deny it or don't deny it or approve it or continue it, it makes no difference on Tuesday.
If you approve the appeal, then you would be overturning the decision by air quality management. And then the building, my understanding would be the building permit would then be no longer red tagged, and that there would be allowed to proceed. Obviously, my guess would be, and I'm not speaking for anyone else, but my guess is that the air quality management might appeal that decision to another.
So federal law then would not trump our decision here by saying, hey, I don't know how you feel about this whole thing, but you're not going anywhere without, thank you. I mean,
Well, we don't want to get too far afield here. I think what we have before us is we have a denial on the record right now in which the applicant has come before us asking us to, well, one, to ask for a continuance, although within his documentation that he submitted, there's no indication of a request for a continuance at all. We have well, I don't want to get out of hand here either. I mean, we do have something from Nova Geotechnical that would also be present in the meeting probably on Tuesday along with Mr. Schmidt. I'm going to assume. Is that an assumption? Is that a fair assumption, Mr. Schmidt? He's nodding his head yes, so we'll accept that. So this doesn't prevent that Tuesday meeting from happening, in which hopefully all parties will come to a conclusion at that time as the best possible way to move forward on this project. Is that, Mr. Wolf, is that kind of what?
That is our intent.
Okay. Mr. Schmidt, is that your intent also, to get this resolved on Tuesday? You can just come up and say yes or no real quick.
My intent is to move forward with what needs to be done in compliance with federal regulation as quickly as possible. I'll be at the meeting on Tuesday. Mr. Pestanelli is, consulted to be there. There may be other engineers from his firm there.
Okay.
But one thing I would like to point out, if I could, Rob.
Make it short. Go ahead.
The issue has come up about the citations, federal law, case law. They're not prepared to argue their case today either. I don't want you to hear the case today. I didn't know till this last night at 6 o'clock we're going to be here, because they don't have this. We're entitled to their citations, the law, the arguments for the positions they've taken. Hopefully we're going to get that on Tuesday. but you're not getting it here today, so.
They're not here to argue
Yeah,
the case
and-
before
and-
us.
And just
Okay.
one other point is that if this thing is denied, I have 25 days to get it into district court. And worst-case scenario, then I have to proceed in the abundance of caution in that direction. And that's change of focus that I don't want to do. I want to focus on getting the job done. And so I strongly request a continuance. I think it's the best avenue to proceed forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? Well, and I guess, maybe, Mr. Schmidt, I should have asked you this, but when you ask for a continuance, how much time are you asking for a continuance? Sorry, didn't mean to send you all the way back to your seat.
Sit up front.
Good exercise, so. How much time for a continuance do you think you need? Especially if you're gonna have this meeting on Tuesday?
I think a week or two, things would start to clarify, Assuming we have some sort of public commitment now that there is going to be a meeting on Tuesday. You have it from me, and I think you got it from Mr. Wolf, so that'll be a big thing. Now, that might lead to a second meeting, but I mean, I'm not, you don't meet for 2 months. I'm not, certainly don't think that's necessary. I hope it's not necessary. I mean, we haven't settled this thing in 2 or 3 weeks. I think it'll be an unhappy situation for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess, could we ask Trevor to come up?
Absolutely. Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd, we've heard from the property owner asking for a continuance. We've heard, as I understand it, from AQMD saying that federal law trumps whatever we do here anyway, and my reading, my characterization, and that even though things should, from a public health standpoint, should move along more quickly, the reference was to a heavy winter, and it's September, so we might have a couple of days before the heavy winter. What is the planning department's position on a continuance on this?
Well, that was, when I spoke with Mr. Schmidt this morning, he was pressing for a continuance, and I wasn't going to recommend one way or the other. Again, at this point, it's going to be the board's decision. I don't know that this board has the technical expertise, honestly, when it comes right down to it, to make a determination of whether or not air quality is interpreting federal statute or federal law correctly. And so I don't know that in that regard, the continuance is going to do much good, but, I'll leave it up to the board.
Mr. Lloyd, if we talk about a continuance per se, a continuance would be until the next board meeting, correct?
That's
So that would be
correct.
a month out. We're not talking like 2 weeks or 10 days or anything like that. This gets delayed at least till a month out till we hear it again, and by then we're already into October. And what that would do is that would be a stop order in which nothing gets done.
That's correct.
Because even if they agree to something, maybe Mr. Large can help me, but even if they agree on Tuesday to clean it up, but there is a denial here before us, does that put everything on hold until such time as it comes back before us and we make a ruling on that? Can someone help me out on that one?
My understanding of the permitting process would be that if the building permit, there's a meeting of the minds on Tuesday in regard to the process forward, then the board, or the planning commission or the planning department has the ability to greenlight an operation moving forward on that.
And then it would not come back before his appeal to the board?
It would be essentially mooted. I mean, it would still be agendized, but then it would need to be determination on whether it would be mooted or.
And at that point, the appellant could withdraw the appeal. Yeah.
Or the appellant could not show up on Tuesday and everything stays on hold until we have another meeting in the future. I mean, as a possibility, and then again, we're back to a later date to try and get this stuff cleaned up.
That is a possibility.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready for a motion.
Yeah, I think I'm ready also. Mr. Stanley, you have any more questions you want to ask?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and close it and bring it back to the board for discussion. Well, no, we won't. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public? I don't know if this gets heard, or the public is allowed to speak on this, but if they are, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak?
We have no public comment.
Thank you kindly. We'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of continuing this, kicking the can down the road. I think we need to move forward and support the air quality department.
Mr. Stanley,
My concern, obviously, is the overlap of federal law and county regulations and how that works. And that seems to be pretty gray, and why it's in front of us seems a little gray too. That being said, it sounds like our denial, as opposed to a continuance, actually imposes the impetus for the Tuesday meeting to work.
Yes.
And we are also in support of the AQMD by doing that.
Correct.
Yes, I think you raise a very good point on that. In addition, I think air quality is the resident experts on this. We've already asked them some questions about their training and their background. Have they done it before? So I have no reason to doubt what they are doing is not following the federal standard. With that being said, this doesn't prevent a meeting from taking place on Tuesday. In fact, even if we deny come Tuesday, they should be right on it and start moving forward. The appeal process is still out there, and it was mentioned through air quality as to the steps that Mr. Schmidt can go ahead and appeal it. So he is still afforded his rights to address this further up the chain. So with that, I will entertain a motion. Anyone?
I'll do the motion. I don't know whether to do this one or this one. Because this requires that you.
No, yes, that.
I believe, isn't there one on?
Mr. Lloyd, if you'll come to the podium. We have two items here. We have a motion here, but then there's also a possible motion within the staff recommendation.
That requires the chair of the board
Yeah.
prepare a written order of the decision file it with the secretary of the Board of Adjustments. And a copy will be served to the appellant.
Or is that just more of a procedural item if there is a denial?
I do believe that's a procedural item. The motion would be the one above it at this point, and so,
This single piece is what we're talking about?
yes.
Thank
Okay.
you. Ms. Hill, you want to make a motion?
Sure, thank you. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Board of Adjustment deny this appeal and uphold the decision of the Air Quality Management Division.
Thank you. Second? Okay, Mr. Stanley, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This now carries. Mr. Lloyd, do you need to read an appeal for the good of the order?
Appeal the appeal.
Okay, most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Next item on the agenda is chair and board items. Number one, future agenda items. Does the board have anything they wish to add?
No.
Thank you. How about B is requests for information from staff? Any?
No.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, number 10, Director and Legal Counsel items. Report on previous Board of Adjustment items. Mr. Lloyd?
Nothing to report.
Thank you kindly. Mr. Large, how about legal information and updates?
Nothing to report.
Thank you kindly. Madam Secretary, general public comment. Is there anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have no public comment.
Thank you kindly. We are adjourned.
Hey.